There's this common paradox, which is that the words that are most frequently used and that have the greatest impact are often the words that are the most ill-defined and therefore subject to manipulation, deceit, and propaganda. So the word terrorist, for example, is something that pervades countless political discussions of great significance. And we're essentially at the point, literally, where if the government points to somebody and simply utters the word terrorist, large numbers of citizens, it used to just be Republicans, but now under President Obama, it's Democrats as well, will cheer for whatever it is that is done to them, no matter how lawless, no matter how much how little evidence has been presented to justify it. The mere fact that they've been labeled a terrorist is something that will basically cause a majority of people to sanction whatever is done. And yet what's so fascinating about the word terrorist is it really is a term that has absolutely no fixed meaning. It is simply a term that means whatever the person wielding it wants it to mean. Originally there was a sense that it meant indiscriminate, deliberate attacks on civilians for political ends, and yet we see all the time that if a Muslim attacks a military base in Fort Hood and kills soldiers who are being deployed to a war, he's called a terrorist. If a civilian in a particular country that the United States invades, engages in violence against the invading occupying army, he too is called a terrorist. And yet when the United States or its allies engages in violence clearly aimed at civilians, deliberately or recklessly, you can never call that terrorism. And so terrorism has basically become nothing more than Muslims who engage in violence against the United States or who otherwise impede the will of the United States. And so what's amazing to me is you can talk to a whole bunch of people who are otherwise sympathetic to civil liberties, concerns, and the like. I was on a San Francisco radio station today with what is, I guess, known as a liberal public station. Michael Kresny, I think, is the radio host, and he was saying essentially that he was thrilled when Anwar al-Awlaki was killed, even though it was done without due process, because he said, I know he's a terrorist. And the reality is that he has no idea whether or not Anwar al-Awlaki is a terrorist, because he has no idea what the term even means, and he has no idea whether or not he actually was ever involved in violent attacks against the United States, because no evidence has ever been presented. What people really know is that Anwar al-Awlaki is somebody who advocated views that are antithetical to, adverse to the United States. The idea that the United States is bringing huge amounts of violence to the Muslim world, and therefore it's not just the right but the duty of Muslims to attack back as a means of defense and deterrence. And yet that is not terrorism, that's pure First Amendment free speech expression. But because the word terrorism is so potent and shuts down all debate, the mere application of that label by the government anonymously and with no evidence to this individual has made huge numbers of people stand up and cheer the most radical power a government can seize, which is the power to target one's own citizens for death, for assassination, in total secrecy and with no due process. And that, to me, really illustrates the potency of how these propagandistic terms are wielded.
And in all of these cases that you're talking about, what you have is the violation of a principle